It is time for my annual Etsy pros and cons video. I've been doing these since 2021, so this will be my fourth, I think. Before we go into it, I do want to just say that this is going to cover whether or not I think Etsy is still a good place to sell on from a handmade seller's point of view. And when I say handmade, I'm talking about Etsy's definition of handmade, which is anything that you've made with your hands or that you have designed. So it can include print on demand and digital, providing obviously that you have designed desserts. That's always thinking about food. As long as you've designed the stuff yourself. Hello, I'm Kim. This is the Coffee and Craft podcast, and it's basically where I drink coffee, I digress a lot, and keep you company while you craft away or work. Occasionally I will get the odd comment from people saying that I do talk a lot in these videos. Yes, Colin, that's the point. Hence them being podcast episodes. Alright, so without further ado, grab yourself a beverage and let's digress, this time about the pros and cons of selling on Etsy in 2024. Oh boy. Strap yourselves in, because the cons list is the longest it's ever been. We're going to start with the pros. I want to get off to a positive start. There's lots to cover. So the first one is organic traffic. Whenever I say organic traffic, I usually get two different responses. One saying, I absolutely love Etsy for its organic traffic, I couldn't live without it. Or the other, which I often fall into, which is, organic traffic? Where's that then? Anyone seen it? It appears to have left the chat. I have to say, I don't currently do very much with my Etsy shop. I grew a little bit disillusioned with it at the end of last year, and at the beginning of this year I started my own website, and all of the time, the money, the energy that I was putting into my Etsy shop prior to that, I then switched it over to my website. Haven't looked back, but that's a story for another day, and I will be coming back to that. But even though I now do very, very little with my Etsy shop, I still do get consistent organic sales from it. I say organic, I'm not strictly sure just how organic it is. Of course, Etsy is claiming a lot of the traffic and I guess a lot of the sales that convert from that traffic, because people tend to find me here, but also over on my other channel, which is where I share my more crafty, stitchy stuff, and they will go to Etsy and they will look for my name, because I don't actually link to my Etsy shop, I link to my website. So to find me on Etsy, it's easy enough, it's Beechtree Handmade, but I don't give people a lift there anymore. You have to go over there yourself and type it in. So usually the first page of my search results on Etsy are always variations of my name while people have been looking for me. So how organic? Etsy's definitely calling it organic. They're claiming it. But obviously these are people that have found me elsewhere and have gotten to know me elsewhere and are checking out the shop. I'm still going to count it as organic traffic, because organic traffic is basically people that have found you while searching on their platform, which is exactly what this is. So by their definition of organic traffic, this counts. And if I can still get consistent sales every month, even if it's just a few, from doing nothing, I mean, that tells me that it's a worthwhile tool to have in my tool belt at least. So I'm going to give them a check for that. Organic traffic. Another one that I often mention in these videos, it hasn't stopped, and that is that it is low investment, at least to start with. And if you are just starting out, or you haven't really sold anything online before and you're not really sure how it all works, I think Etsy is a brilliant choice for that. It seems a bit condescending to call it training wheels, but that's essentially what it is. And it's where I cut my teeth as well. And cut my teeth, is that a phrase? That I'm sure if that's a phrase I've heard before. Anyway, what I'm saying is it's where I got started. And I do have, despite everything, I do feel very emotionally attached to that bloody platform because of that. But my business would not exist had I not got started on Etsy, and it's low investment to get started. It's 20 cents to list one item, and for the UK folks, after VAT, that's going to be like 19p. You don't pay anything else unless you sell something. Now we'll get back to the fees in a bit, because you obviously do start to pay something once you've sold something. But for those who don't have a large budget to spend on anything, for example, a website, Etsy is a perfect starting point. The other thing that I don't think Etsy gets enough credit for is that it's a trusted website now. When I got started on Etsy 2 years after it actually began, this was back in 2007, Etsy was still a very small business. And here in the UK, no one had heard of it. And all of my sales were only to other makers on the platform. And I remember telling my nan, my dear nan, that I had an Etsy shop. And she said, "What's an Etsy? What is an Etsy? Okay." And I used to just tell people that I sold things online, and they would automatically think I was talking about something like eBay. And I just didn't have the heart to put them straight, because it was just easier than having to explain to them what an Etsy was. But now, completely different. Everybody knows what Etsy is. It's a household name, and that's not just within the US or here in the UK. It's a global platform, and people know it and they trust it. They trust to buy on it. See, this is where it gets tricky, because I used to be able to say that with such confidence in the past. People trust to buy on it for the most part these days. Unfortunately, over the course of 2020, 2021, the last few years, there have been a huge influx of sellers that weren't so good, shall we say, in various niches, that have eroded some of that trust that buyers have had. But for the most part, because we're sticking with the pros now, this is the light and bright and shiny part. For the most part, people trust the platform, which is why even if you have a website, even if you're more established, it can be useful to have in your tool belt, because it's a way for people to buy from you in a way that they feel protected and safe, before they then may purchase from you again on your website, or even just purchase from you again. They may never go to your website. They may prefer to stick with Etsy and buying on Etsy. And unfortunately, it is a bit of a leap of faith when you buy from a website. I'm not trying to put people off. If anything, please do help small sellers out and purchase from their websites. But if you're really worried, you can check them out on Etsy and start there, because you know you're more protected as a buyer. So that is actually a pro, I think, as a seller, because it just means that you're offering your customers another way to purchase from you, and that can only be a good thing. Changing the subject ever so slightly, I bought this mug from a seller on Etsy. In future, I would purchase from her website, but the first purchase I made on Etsy. And for anybody who's interested, her business name is Sparrow Nest Ceramics, and she does have a website that I will link in the description. But if you really did want to purchase something and you didn't want to purchase from her website, she also has an Etsy shop. You see what I mean? I'm using that as an example, but people do tend to ask me where I get my cups from, so there you go. The lovely Cara, thank you. And I think I've kind of touched on this when I was talking about how it was low investment. Setting up an Etsy shop and getting it all approved and up and running is actually fairly easy. Keeping it up and running tends to be a more interesting thing. Etsy does have a habit of sometimes shutting shops almost immediately after they've started trading. And this is just an automated system that they've got going, and people do sometimes get caught up in the nets accidentally. So if you contact Etsy, if this happens to you, they will reopen your shop unless you are breaking Etsy policy. So I can't make this video without saying this. If you're going to start an Etsy shop in 2024, please read the seller's handbook. Familiarise yourself with what's allowed on the platform and what isn't. Okay, let's move on to the cons then, because we've got a lot to get through. Unfortunately, I feel really bad having to do this, because as I say, I do actually love Etsy, but they have really tested my patience these last few years. What I would say is wait until the end of this video for my conclusion, because despite the cons that I'm about to lay out, there is an argument for getting started on Etsy as a handmade seller. I'll go more into that in a minute, but let's just crack on with the cons, shall we? Okay, I can't read out what I've written here. It's saturated AF. I guess that's the clean way of saying it. Saturation has always been a thing, but it tickles me that what we considered a saturated platform a few years ago. Oh, we didn't know what saturated meant, let's be honest. The saturated of 2019 would be heaven to the saturation that we're now seeing. I think it's because the saturation that we were seeing in 2019 was at least saturation of other sellers like ourselves, like actual handmade sellers, actual vintage sellers, at least people who were following the terms of service as laid out by the platform. Now it's saturation from people who shouldn't even be there. Now Etsy did kind of have a hand in creating this problem, whether they want to admit it or not. They have at least, in recent months at the time of filming, come out and told us about some things that they're doing to try and tidy up the platform. Now, Etsy's pretty good at saying a lot of great sounding things and not following through. They have a bit of a history with that. So I'm taking it with a pinch of salt. I'm trying not to get my hopes up, but it does look as if they are tightening up the ship. That's not right. They're just trying to tidy it up a little bit, it seems. We shall see. We shall see. But yes, it can be difficult to sell handmade stuff on there at the moment, especially when a lot of the things that will get suggested to buyers next to yours are going to be generic factory-made things in the handmade category. Can't make this video without saying that because that has been an ongoing problem. Despite organic traffic being a pro for Etsy, you cannot rely on it alone anymore. There once was a day when you could rely on organic traffic and make a living from it, and I was one of those people that actually lived that, and it just feels like a million years ago. If I hadn't have experienced that myself, I don't think I would have believed that was ever possible. But once upon a time, in the good old days, it was. Not anymore. Not anymore. If you're not running ads, then you have to generate your own traffic to the site. You have to be sending people from other places. This is one that I have been moaning about year after year after year, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse, and it's the erasure of shop identity. It's very difficult to make a name for yourself on the platform because you got to remember that Etsy is a business all of its own, and they're in the business of Etsy and promoting Etsy. So it's getting trickier and trickier to get our customers to remember our names. The amount of times I will look at the search results and I can't even see the shop name underneath. There have been times where I have clicked into an actual listing and I have scrolled right past the shop name. I'm looking for it. I am looking for the shop name, and it's there. To Etsy's credit, it is there, but it blends in with the other text very well. So well that it does make me wonder if that is purposeful. You know, if you've ever bought from Etsy, do you tell your friends that you bought it from this seller, or do you say, oh yeah, I got it from Etsy? It's just hard, and to be fair to Etsy, I get it. They are a business, so it's not their responsibility to promote mine, but it used to be easier to promote ourselves and our businesses on the platform. Yeah, just know that that is a thing. This one sort of came in and ended up destroying my business as it stood years ago. Kind of drifted off again, and it's back with a bang. Localized search. And if I was only selling on Etsy now, this would bother me a lot more than it does. But even though I only use Etsy as a tool, it still bothers me. Localized search means that you lose a lot of your customers if a lot of your customers are in another country. So my customers tend to be more or less 50-50 UK and the US. And I can almost tell when localized search has been ramped up or switched on, or however you want to put it, because I just all of a sudden my sales drop and I only sell to UK. And I remember when, I don't know if I was taken out of localized search, but all of a sudden I just started getting US customers again. And it was, again, 50-50. And it was like, what? Did somebody just press a button? What happened? Who knows? But I have noticed this year that my US customers have not slowed down on my website. There it's 50-50. On Etsy, I'm lucky if I ever sell to the US. It's almost all UK. Which, given the economic crisis that we are currently in, Okay, I alluded to this earlier. Fees start to add up once you start to sell. Don't believe me? Try selling on the platform. And there will be a fee for this, that and the other. If you're in the UK, there's VAT on this, that and the other. If you sneeze, there'll be a fee for that and probably VAT on top of that too. And by the time you've worked out your profit, sometimes you're thinking, well, that wasn't worth it. And I've definitely alluded to this one. Resellers and dropshippers are rampant on the site. Like I said, hopefully Etsy are doing something about that. And hopefully at some point in 2024, I'll be able to do a video where I congratulate Etsy on a job well done. But again, we shall see. All right, last one, last con. And it's kind of linked to the sort of the wave of dropshippers and scammers and the rest of it. Unfortunately, copycats and people stealing designs. Now, I have to say I haven't had too much of an issue with this myself, but I think that's largely to do with the niche that I'm in, which is hand embroidery. So if somebody was to copy me, they would have to be a hand embroidery artist. And I like to think there's a form of authenticity in this niche, where people won't blatantly do that. They might be inspired. Some people might be over-inspired. You know what I mean? A lot of people copy other people's designs and they'll be like, well, I didn't copy, I was inspired. It's like, no, you. But I think if you're in the print on demand, say for example, you put your designs on sweatshirts or you have digital products, for example, it's a real problem in these niches. And it's heartbreaking because you can come across some really talented artists and then you can see that their designs have been just pulled. Sometimes they don't even change. They'll pull their photographs and they won't even try and change the photographs. It's just, what? Again, I don't have too much first-hand experience with this, so I can't speak to it too much, but I have noticed over the last year or so far fewer original artists on the platform, and that breaks my heart. Alright, I'm going to finish the cons here, otherwise I'm going to talk myself out of selling on the platform. I do want to finish the video with this, because it wasn't meant to sound so doom and gloomy. Etsy still has a valid place in the handmaker's toolkit. Toolkit? Two-belt. Tool. Just, it's valid. And despite all of these things that I've been saying, I know the cons list was so much longer than the pros list, but some of the things in that pros list are huge and actually make it worth even trying, because there are not ways around the cons that I've just mentioned, but with a little bit of effort, a little bit of time and creativity, there are things that you can do. For example, I did a video recently about ways that we could try and prove to Etsy and our customers that we are genuinely handmade. And the reason why I made that video was because I think it's more important than ever if we have any people clicking on our listings on our shop or in our shops, we have a small amount of time to show them that we are the real McCoy next to all of this generic tat. Because all of that generic tat sold by generic sellers, they're not going to go through the extra effort. So you have, as handmade sellers, as designers, as artists, you have this at your disposal. It is an advantage that you can have over everybody else because it is harder to replicate. You cannot fake authenticity because it's a feeling. People will either look at someone's shop and they will get a feeling. They may not understand it. They may not have the language to describe why they're feeling what they're feeling, but they will just feel like the vibe is off. And there are ways that we can show people that the vibe is good with us. We are the vibe. So I don't want to put anybody off from trying on Etsy. Unless, of course, you were thinking about dropshipping, in which case, be gone. But if anybody was to ask me if Etsy was still a good place to get started on, my answer would be an absolute yes. You have to be smarter with how you are on the platform, but it's still a very good place to get started. And if you are more established, it is still a very good tool to have in your tool belt, because as I do, you can still get the additional sale, and who's going to turn down an additional sale? And also, I think I mentioned this as a pro, does offer your customers a safe way to get to know you, and I think that is a huge feather in Etsy's cap. For all of their cons, I definitely still recommend it. You just need to know how to use Etsy. That being said, of course there was something else coming up. I also recommend that people work towards starting their own website up at the same time as soon as possible, as soon as they can. Now, I do appreciate that a website is not for everyone, at least in whatever stage of your business that you're in. I was in business for 10 years until I set mine up. As I said earlier, in 2023, that was when I set up my website, and I had been going for 10 years by that point. So this doesn't mean that you have to rock up on day one with a fully fledged website. You might not be there yet. You do have to be making at least a certain amount every month that you can plow back into your business just to pay for a website. So the way I looked at it was that I was looking at the fees that I was paying on Etsy every month, and I saw that it was, even on a really dry month, it was still more or about the same as I would be paying for a website. So I thought, and it's paid off. My website is usually the winner in terms of sales. It's almost always the winner in terms of revenue, and I always forget profit. Why do I always forget profit? It's the most important metric of them all. So yes, start your website up as soon as you can. I use Shopify. There are so many others. This isn't me just promoting Shopify. It's just that I always get asked what I use. I use Shopify. I chose Shopify because I liked the idea of being able to link my items to my YouTube channel. If you look below, you'll see that they're linked here on my YouTube channel. However, I had meant to link them to my other channel because that's a better fit for it, but you have to be monetized. Thanks, YouTube. Anyway, even without that, I'm loving it over there. It can get a bit pricey. As I say, it's £25. I'm in the UK. £25 a month, or you can pay annually. I forget how much it is annually, but it works out at about £19 a month. So you can pay it monthly, or you can pay annually. And even if you don't have the budget for a website and you're not ready to build one yet, you can and should, I don't often use the word should, but I do genuinely believe everybody needs one of these, a mailing list. And again, I have another video about setting up an email list, and I'll link to that in the description if you want to go and watch that as well. But one video I do think you should check out if you haven't seen it already, because I know I'm going to get pushback on this. People saying that Etsy is a terrible place for handmade, and it always has been, or at least it certainly has been for a while, and yada 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 yada. Go and watch this video because I talk in detail about why I think Etsy might be changing and why Etsy could still be a really good place for handmade. And I will see you in the next video. Ta-ra!